And to discuss the parliamentary hearings into the phone hacking scandal, I spoke a short time ago to the Liberal Democrat spokesman on culture, media and sport, Don Foster, who was in our London studio. Don Foster, thanks for talking to Lateline.
Good evening.
Everyone's waiting to hear from the Murdochs and also from Rebekah Brooks. This is the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee's big moment. Is it up to the job?
I think it is. I mean, there are real questions that have to be asked about what happens to any evidence that they uncover. But the key thing for the committee at the moment is to be asking, for example, Rebekah Brooks, who said a week ago there was more to come. What more is to come? Because everybody expects some further revelations. They need to be asking James Murdoch, who signed off cheques to various people who had had their phones hacked and admitted he didn't really know the details of why he was signing the cheques. Does he now know? And to Rupert Murdoch, of course, the head of this global empire, what exactly has he been doing since he arrived in the UK? Because his opening words were that his key task was to save Rebekah Brooks.
At the same time, though, of course, there are some 10 members of this committee. They don't have a lot of staff, and there's not a lot of time, is there, for each committee member to ask questions, to build a case, if you like?
No, it's going to be very difficult. But, of course, they have been rehearsing. I understand that the Murdochs and Rebekah Brooks have spent most of the morning over here in the UK rehearsing what they're going to say. There is some support for select committees. And, of course, there'll have been no end of advice being offered to members of the committee as to the questions they should ask. Indeed, our newspapers are full of advice as to what those questions should be. But the key thing that everybody wants to know is basically how much did the Murdochs and Rebekah Brooks know about what was going on. We've seen already that Rebekah Brooks has resigned. She's been questioned by the police and indeed has been arrested. Many people are now saying, why is James Murdoch still in post?
Well, in fact, given that Rebekah Brooks has been arrested, given that police investigation, how much of a problem do you think that's going to represent and a potential for people to hide behind it and not answer questions?
Well, there are a number of inquiries that are now taking place in the UK. The most important one is the one being conducted by the Metropolitan Police. Remember, these are the people who, in 2006, did a frankly very shoddy affair of looking into the allegations that existed at that time. They're now carrying out their detailed investigation. And, of course, there will be a potential for people like Rebekah Brooks and James Murdoch, who's clearly also going to be questioned by the police, for saying, look, we can't say anything in case it incriminates us. So there is that difficulty. But I'm sure that my colleagues on the Select Committee are pretty adept at asking questions. Will be finding ways around that to get the maximum information out. This is, frankly, their moment in the sun, and they're going to do everything they can to get the maximum outcome from it.
After so many years of the Murdochs wielding influence and indeed politicians actually being scared of the Murdoch press, is it really something like open season now in London?
Very much so. I mean, one of the things that if you look back at the history of the UK, for something like 30 years, governments of all political persuasion have tended to be far too chummy with the Murdoch empire, right the way through from the time in 1981 when he was allowed to buy the Times newspaper, through to even much more recently, 2006, when we had a report that said something like 305 journalists had illegally obtained personal data, yet that wasn't thoroughly investigated in the way many of us feel it should have been. So what's now happened, of course, is that the concern about how people are going to be covered in the Murdoch press and on TV has now gone, and it really is open season because frankly, there are three groups of people who've got questions to answer. One, of course, is the Murdoch press and other journalists as well. Secondly, we've got the police, where there are allegations of corruption, of payments being made to police officials for information. And thirdly, the politicians ourselves, where questions, frankly, have to be asked as to why did we allow this to continue for such a long period of time.
Well, on that political front, of course, you're part of this government. What about Prime Minister David Cameron? He's under enormous pressure. He hired Andy Coulson despite getting numerous people telling him, or having numerous people tell him not to do so. There are also questions now about his socialising with James Murdoch and Rebecca Brooks, just as he was in fact taking the decision-making process on B-Sky-B away from the business secretary. Will the Lib Dems be forcing David Cameron to answer some of these questions?
Well, it's very clearly on the public record that my party leader and Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg advised the Prime Minister not to appoint Andy Coulson. But that doesn't mean to say that this is, as it were, a sacking offence. I don't see there's a justification for the Prime Minister to resign, as some people are saying he should. After all, what he did was appoint somebody who absolutely assured him he knew nothing about phone hacking, had not been involved in it, gave those assurances on numerous occasions to the Prime Minister, and then subsequently the Prime Minister has said, look, if he was lying to me, he was also lying to the police and lying to the House of Commons Select Committee, and that clearly would lead to a criminal prosecution. But
given the advice that David Cameron was getting, given the sensitivities of it, does it show poor judgment?
Well, I don't think I would have made that decision had I been in the same situation, and I know that Nick Clegg, the Deputy Prime Minister, wouldn't have done. But what I'm very anxious to do is to not allow that particular issue to deflect from the much bigger issue about the illegal activities of a small number of journalists and, of course, the real concern as to whether or not the Murdoch empire is fit and proper, not only to take over more of B-Sky-B here in the UK, but even whether it's fit and proper to own the 39% of shares that it currently has. And that's an issue that I think that our independent regulator should be looking at very closely indeed.
So, Don Foster, I know that you want to go, you want to watch these hearings, as do so many people around the world. When it's all over, in 4, 5, 6 hours' time, do you think, in one sense, history will have been made?
I suspect we're all going to be rather disappointed. I think it's quite likely that the witnesses are going to some extent, hide behind the legal plea that they can't say too much because of the ongoing criminal investigations. I think we're going to hear a lot of people saying they're terribly sorry about what's happened, but I suspect we won't have as much light being shed on what's happened to date as many people are hoping. But I hope I'm proved wrong, because we really do need to have answers to the numerous questions that exist, not least what is there still to come out of the woodwork about these appalling things that have been going on.
And not least, of course, seeing the Murdochs front up to a parliamentary inquiry, something we've not seen before. Don Foster in the UK, many thanks for joining us.
Thank you.